This video intro doesn't violate any copyright laws, at least I think. I think that's good enough, right?
What is up, guys? It is King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh! Back again with yet another deck profile that I am confident calling pretty good. This is my cubic deck profile for the June 2020 format, and oh my goodness, guys, people are sleeping on this deck. It is insane, and I'm not just trying to overhype it like some unnamed Yu-Gi tubers do often and lose all credibility. I just genuinely believe that this deck can pack such a punch as a rogue deck because, like, this is the time to be playing cubics because we're in such a heavy monster effect format. This deck thrives on people who are just banking on sitting on a field of monster interruption, because it just basically says, hey, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want anyway. So I would highly recommend picking this deck up. It got a consistency boost in the last support wave that came out. I can't remember what that was. It might have been dual overload that came in. I can't remember, to be honest. So don't hold me to that. I'm drawing a blank. It's been such a long time since I've really cared that much about a product other than Eternity Code. But yeah, it's so good. It's just one of those decks that's like right in the middle between like control and aggro and stun and OTK and all the above, because it's not really a burn deck. It does have a burn effect, but I wouldn't call it a straight on burn deck. It's just really quirky. I think that's why I really like it. It's such a unique play style. So it's not only a lot of fun, but you can play it competitively and steal wins left and right, guys. It's so awesome. But anyway, let's jump right into the profile. I don't want to ramble for too long about the deck before you even see the deck. So we start out with our boss monster and our actual main win condition, which is Crimson Nova here. So this guy is interesting because he's unaffected by all activated monster effects of monsters whose attacks are 3,000 or less. And he also has the crazy effect where he attacks once, and if he destroys a monster by battle, he gets to attack again. And then at the end of your turn, he burns both you and your opponent for 3,000. So that's where the OTK can happen. But if not, you're still sitting on a crazy hard to deal with monster. And it's just so cool that the way this card works. It's very unique. I've not seen many like it. But yeah, so I think really the goal should be to try to win as quickly as possible, just because especially in today's Yu-Gi-Oh, we have a lot of resilient decks. But if they're depending all on their monsters, you don't really have to worry. The only thing to keep an eye on with this guy is the word activated effects. So like if it's a floodgate type effect or an effect that doesn't have to activate, you'll have to watch out for those. Although none come to mind at the moment. I'm drawing a blank on monsters that do that are like really prominent right now. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but it is something to keep in mind. Maybe if you're playing at your locals and someone's playing a more niche deck, just keep that in mind in the wording. I know Yu-Gi-Oh players don't like to read, sometimes myself included. Next, we've got Duza, which is interesting. He can be a beat stick when you need him to be, if you boost him up using cubic karma. But it's usually an unnecessary thing to do. If you're doing that, plan A failed most of the time. But what he's good for is summoning off of Summoner Monk, or if you need to, you can normal summon just this. And then it sends whatever cubic card you want in the graveyard to the graveyard. Usually it's Karma, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's something else depending on the game state. But most of the time, if you draw this in your opening hand, you're going to use him as a play starter or just as the name to get out your Crimson Nova, which I did fail to mention. The summoning condition for this is having 3 cubic cards, not cubic monsters, cubic cards in your hand. You have to reveal those 3. They have to have different names. What's cool is, though, let's say you have 2 of these guys in hand, you can still reveal 1 to summon this one, or vice versa. You can count himself as one of those different names to summon him, which is really nice. But anyway, yeah, this is how you get to those names, because you do want to have those, and that's how you get out your Crimson Nova in the first place. I'm sorry that I failed to mention that right off the bat. But yeah, you definitely want to be sure that you can get to those names, which is why the consistency boost was very helpful. And I'll explain that once we get there. Next, we've got Vjam, which is such a nice card. People really underestimate this guy. They tend to just kind of count him as Link Karibo fodder, but no, this is a fantastic in-archetype searchable stun card. It can't be destroyed by battle, and at the end of the damage step, if he battles, you don't have to, you can have him move into your spell and trap zone face up, and then it gives your opponent's monster a cubic counter, and monsters with cubic counters cannot attack or activate their effects. Then in your main phase 2, you can just pop him right back out into the monster zone, but the cubic counter stays on your opponent's monster. So it's just, if they can't get rid of the card by battle, you can just sit on it and stun them for a little while, or use it to essentially negate that monster's effects without actually having to do anything to directly affect that monster, which is super nice, because I believe, let me take a quick look here and make sure I don't say something that's dumb. You do not have to target the monster at all. So if a monster is immune to targeting, this gets around that, which is really nice. Next, we've got these three that I'm not really going to say much about because they are in there to have different cubic names. There are niche moments where I have summoned them, but very, very, very rarely. We did get a lot of support in the last wave of support for this deck and this archetype, but you still unfortunately do have to run the 3 cards that don't do anything in order to have enough different names. But what's cool is you now have more variety, so you don't have to run as many. I think in the past people have run a whole lot more than just 1 copy of these guys, but now you only have to run these 3. So it's a whole lot better than it was, and you can pitch them or whatever. They actually have a use now. They're not totally dead in hand, but like I said, you have them there, and they can occasionally brick you. I apologize if you hear a thumping. My dogs wait until I am recording to make as much noise as they can in the background. That was my dog itching his own head. Anyway, we will move on. Next, we've got 2 Summoner Monk. 3 can get weird and clunky, so I tend to just stick to 2. But this is really good for bringing out a Duza, so then you get that send to grave and thus probably a search. And then you've got an exceeds 2 level 4s for an exceeds monster of your choice. I'll get to those in a moment, but that's super nice to have readily available. Next, we've got 3 Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, wait, huh? But this is really great. Remember, your cubics are inherently a going second deck. Now, I've talked about some decks that I don't believe in building going predominantly one way or the other, but cubics specifically are built to do that. Like, it's very obviously in their design that they were meant to go second. Now, there will be a time that you have to go first, probably, and that I have, information for that later, but yeah, this is a great going second card because it's a free body. And then what I like to do is link into some of the Tenyi guys and some other normal links, and then bounce whatever I don't like on my opponent's board back to their hand. And then it's also just very nice to bait out the negates, like I said, because they're either going to have to solemn or whatever if they know where you're headed, or they're going to have to just use negates to avoid losing something. So it's very nice for baiting out those negates, like I said, or just straight up removal. Next, we've got 2 of our friendly turtle guy, Gamma Seal, just because in today's age, you have to be maining something to deal with monster threats, even cubics. There sometimes will just be such a presence that if you don't already have your plays ready to go, you're going to have to take care of threats first before you can go off and get to your plays and establish, your board and whatever play line you're going through. So that's just really important to keep in mind. That's it for the monsters. Now let's talk about the spells. We've got Cubic Karma here. This one specifically, I prefer it to be in the graveyard. Otherwise, it is an attack booster by sending your Vjams from wherever they are to the graveyard. That can be useful. If you've got the win and you don't need to search, you've got out your Crimson Nova, you can just go ahead and boost his attack because it is a permanent boost. and then try and just go for the OTK that way. But if you're still trying to get to plays or get to some other cards that you want in hand, it's better to send this to the graveyard. And we've got a lot of cards that do that, including Duza that we already talked about. Because then this searches any other cubic, cubic monster to your hand. Next, we've got 3 cubic wave. A lot of people have started cutting this to 2. I completely disagree. It is one of your best cards to have, because not only does it facilitate OTKs really easily, but it also is great in the graveyard, because you can banish this and a dead cubic monster, because really once your cubic monsters end up in the grave, they're kind of just going to be there. Most of the time. There is an exception, which we'll get to next, but you banish this and a cubic monster, and then you just, you have to target, unfortunately. You target face-up monsters equal to the monsters you banish and put cubic counters on them, and then their effects are negated and they cannot attack, which is fantastic. So it's one way to get rid of pesky effects or floodgates, you name it. So yeah, it's very nice. But remember, that has to be used on monsters. Next, we've got Cubic Dharma, which is the support card that takes this deck to the next level of consistency. Now, I believe it is a hard once per turn. Yeah, it is. So, but you can use both effects just once each. So it's not like if you use one, you cannot use the other, I do believe, unless I'm reading that wrong. Yeah, you can only use each of the following effects. So, yeah. Basically, on the surface, you send 1 cubic card from your deck to the graveyard, and you get to draw a card. It's really nice in combination with that, but you don't always get that. So, you know, the chances of that are actually pretty tiny. But the cool thing about this is you can do that every turn. It's a continuous card. So you can do it next turn if you draw an unwanted cubic card, which is super dope. And then you can also banish this from the graveyard if you do lose it or destroy it or whatever on your own. And then you can target a cubic monster in your graveyard and add it back to your hand. So it allows for some recursion and recycling, which is really nice. Next, to send cards to the graveyard, we've got Foolish Burial Goods. So this is just another search card for us. It sends either Dharma or Karma or one of the traps that's good in the graveyard to the graveyard whenever we want them there. So that just boosts consistency. Then for other consistency boosts, we've got Pot of Desires and those moments of just like, well, I've got to gamble. I don't have what I need. And we've got Reasoning for the same reason. Reasoning. Anyway, yeah, that wasn't that funny, but I just word association, you know, comedy. But it's really tough for your opponent to guess what level anything's going to be because this deck has a lot of variety, especially if they don't know what you're playing yet. So very good card. Next, we've got 2 Twin Twister. Discarding isn't that big of a deal. It does account for usually a 2 for 2. So that does suck sometimes if you're already down an advantage, but there's really not better removal for this deck. I know a lot of people are going to say Cosmic Cyclone. You can do that, but you just have to pay closer attention to your life points with this deck because occasionally that 3,000 hit does hurt you too. So if it's late game, that's the only thing I would keep in mind. But yeah, otherwise use what removal you like. And remember, you already also have the Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha ready to banish. So yeah. Then we've got 2 Called by the Grave. Since we're predominantly a going second deck, I wouldn't worry too much about hand traps. A lot of going first decks aren't playing a whole lot of them. And if they are, it's going to be probably impermanence, and Called by the Grave doesn't really affect that all that much. So that's just where we are. Then we've got Cubic Causality. I'll put that one over here. Unification and Cubic Ascension. So these 2 are actually not bad, and they're very searchable. You can get them into the graveyard, and their graveyard effects are the ones that you tend to use more anyway. They just help you stun more. And this one helps you essentially OTK easier as well. So there are a lot of OTK enablers. This allows you to just inflict more damage. And this one allows you to stun your opponent by bringing out your V-Joms. And then, yeah, it just allows you to stun that way. And that's just really nice because there are moments where you just don't get full combo and you can just be like, aha, here we are. But Yeah, and then this has the like the niche search effect and then the fusion effect, but you rarely ever use it. It's actually there to just be for an additional name. And that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's talk about the extra deck. I actually don't have a full extra deck here, and I'll explain why. Basically, for the Tenyu Spirit, these are mandatory. I would put in the Monk. Where am I going with this? The Monk, Lanfarincus, and Berserker here. Just because they're there to be normal monsters essentially, so that you can have that play live. Because you don't want to just have one at the ready, because if they like solemn it or whatever they want to do to it, that's kind of an issue. You can't use your Vishuda. And then I've got a couple Exceeds monsters. You know, I've got, and I think, you know what, I did forget to. These are just things to think about. So I've got. As mandatory Exceeds monsters, I've got Abyss Dweller. I would definitely keep Abyss Dweller in your extra deck, and Baguska, because it's also a great stun for when you're just trying to essentially save up and kill time so that you can get your plays before your opponent can wreck you. And then something to think about, it would be pretty niche, and this already OTKs well enough on its own, so you might not want to, but throw in Double or Nothing with the Utopia double combo. That's not something that is like a mandatory thing as a win condition in my opinion, but it's there if you want to try it. And now let's talk about the side deck. I don't do this often, but I think it's important for this one to see what to do when you go first, because you're not always going to get to go second. I would highly recommend the following. We've got 3 Typhoon. This is for Floodgates, and it's got a nice effect that, let's say you have your cubic cards that are continuous, like Dharma or Karma, and you've got them face up. You can also pop those with it, and then get their graveyard effects, so that they're not just clunking up your field and, you know, not being able to get their second effect. So, but this is really mainly there if you're facing Floodgate.deck. They're still out there. So this really helps with that. Next, we've got, for going first, Summon Limit. We've got Inspector Border. And then for just going second against harder to deal with things, maybe you don't have the out for them, just like Typhoon was there for that. We've got Sphere Boy and Cherries. And then I would throw in, oh, they're not even on the screen, are they? Let's try that again. We got Sphere Boy and Cherries. I would highly recommend this one at least. This one you can substitute for whatever. But like I said, Summon Limit and Inspector Border really help with going first because they just stun out your opponent. Typhoon for the Floodgates. This for just like dealing with things that depend on like Halqifibrax, Noodle Boy combos, or other specific extra deck combos to go off. You can just get rid of them that way. And then Sphere Boy, just for obvious reasons. We're in a format where it's necessary again. And I like it. It's better to top deck this than to top deck Nibiru. So you could do either one, but yeah, Dark Ruler No More unfortunately has no place in this deck because it kind of screws up our win condition. But yeah, guys, that's the deck. It is so fun. I love it so much. It's one of my favorites to play, and I think it is definitely a deck that is being slept on at the moment. I would highly recommend giving it a try, seeing what you like in it that I put in it, and what you don't like, and give it some of your own spice. Enjoy it. Yeah, that's it, guys. If you liked the video, give it a like. Maybe think about subscribing, you know what I mean? If you want more, if you enjoy this weirdness that's happening right at this very moment where I don't know where to take the sentence, subscribe. And yeah, thanks, guys. See ya.